This is Houston Matters, Mayoral Runoff 15, a special edition of the program. I'm Craig Cohen. We're going to devote the entire hour today to talking with the two candidates in Houston's mayoral runoff election, Sylvester Turner and Bill King. While these two men have engaged in dozens of public forums and debates over a long general and now runoff election campaign, now that we're just a few days away from Saturday's runoff election, this hour will be quite different from any traditional debates you may have seen or heard. There won't be any timekeeping or opening or closing statements or official rebuttals, none of that formal debate artifice. Instead, it's a conversation between me and the candidates, who are free and encouraged, in fact, to talk through some of the issues together as we discuss all manner of topics and issues. I just assume stay out of the way where I can, gentlemen. I'll do my best to make sure you both have time to say what you need to say, just like any other Houston Matters program. With that, let me say hello to Bill King and Sylvester Turner. Welcome back to Houston Matters.
Hey, how you doing? Nice to be here.
Thanks. Good evening. Good afternoon, I should say.
In the interest of time, we will not take any calls today, but we do welcome your email questions at talk@houstonmatters.org. We'll also sneak in some questions here and there from News 88.7 reporters as well. Let's start with the city budget. The city of Houston's facing a deficit to the tune of about $126 million next fiscal year. There are limits to how much revenue can be raised due to the city's revenue cap. There are also increasing costs associated with pension payments. This year, the city's going to make about $350 million in those payments. There are limits on how much you as mayor would be able to do to renegotiate those pensions, because the state legislature is responsible for the firefighters' pensions and has shown no willingness, at least to date, to give that control back to the city, nor could they likely do that till 2017 when the legislature meets next. Okay, all that said, what can you do to balance the city budget over the next 2 years? I'll start with Sylvester Turner.
Well, one thing that, let me just say, it's good to be with you as well. I've been on the Appropriations Committee in the legislature in the Texas House for 21 years and been on the Conference Committee, one of five, having to write and balance the state's budget, $200 billion plus, since 2003 to the current day. One thing that, there are a couple of things that I would do. First, I've talked about extensively during the course of this campaign, taking a look at all of the city departments and engaging in what we call zero-based budgeting, where essentially you bring each one of those departments down to zero and you rebuild them. You identify areas that are no longer priorities that the city continues to fund, and you literally eliminate that funding.
Do you think that hasn't happened under the Parker administration?
As far as I am aware, they have not engaged in zero-based budgeting. And so I think that's one method. The second is what I would do is ask each one of the departments to reduce their budgets from anywhere to 5 to 7.5%. as an initial starting point. Okay, I think when you take those two measures in combination, then you automatically will derive some cost savings. And then after that, you see where you are, and then you proceed to look at other areas. But I do think it's important to scrub the budget because oftentimes in the governmental sector, you engage in budgetary creep where you keep adding 2 to 3% on top of things that are no longer priorities.
But with revenue caps in place and the pension obligations that are already in place, assuming you haven't dealt with those issues at all, is what you're talking about, is that anywhere near enough to bringing the budget into balance?
For me, there are two strategies. It's the short term and the long term. The long-term strategy is to engage in comprehensive finance reform, and I've talked about that during the course of this campaign. The credit rating agency dinged the city in 3 areas. One was the debt service that's going to spike in 2018. The other was the unfunded pension obligations, and the third was the revenue cap. And I think for long-term financial stability, the city has to undertake comprehensive finance reform where you address all 3 of those areas, and including bringing in other sources of revenue and expenditures to the table to make sure that you have a holistic, comprehensive system.
We'll come back to pensions, but I'm just want to throw the same question out to you, Bill King. What steps would you take, understanding kind of all that has already been laid out in order to bring the budget into balance in the next couple of years?
Right. So Sylvester's right. We have a long-term and a short-term problem. Pensions can't be dealt with in the short term. And frankly, the property tax cap cannot be dealt with in the short term. You know, that would require a charter amendment, and that can only be done every 2 years, and we just amended the charter. So you can't even look at that property tax cap for another 2 years. And let me say, I object to it being called a revenue cap because it's not a revenue cap. The only revenue stream that's capped is property taxes, sales tax, water and sewer rates, licensing fees. None of those are capped under this charter provision. And they make up about 75% of the city's revenue. So it's only the property taxes that are capped, and even under the cap, they can go up 4.5% a year without any action, without any approval or violation of the cap. So I'm not in favor of modifying that.
So is that enough wiggle room to bring the budget in the short term into balance?
I think it is. In the last 6 years, the city's revenues are up $1 billion. All we ever talk about is how do we get more revenue. Everybody talks about what the spending side of it is. And I think there's a lot of obvious examples. I'll give you two. One I've talked about a lot is a crime lab. City of Pasadena just announced they're going to close their crime lab and consolidate with Harris County. They're going to save $5 million a year. We're spending $30 million a year on our crime lab. But it's also things, and this gets back to Sylvester's point about zero-based budgeting and mission creep. In this last budget that was just approved 90 days ago, facing these huge deficits, we added 775 new positions to the city of Houston. Now, no business in the world would do that in the face of that kind of creep. And here's the other part that's even a little scarier than all that is. All these budget deficits that we're talking about are based on sales tax going up anywhere between 2 and 4%. The last 2 months, sales tax have been down 2%. Which you've got to think is the beginning of this oil price decline that we're seeing. And so we might actually be dealing with declining sales tax next year. And if that's the case, our deficit could be a whole lot bigger.
It sounds to me like maybe the two of you are not all that far apart when it comes to looking at the short-term budget situation. You may approach it somewhat differently, but for the most part, you want to kind of review what the city's spending money on and make some adjustments along the way and try and bring it into balance. What about the long term? There's pretty distinctive plans of attack there. Let's again set aside pensions for just a moment, and let's just talk about what would you like to do in the long term, independent of pensions. Let's say the state does not give you the opportunity to negotiate with firefighters over that pension, and you have to make do with what you can control. What would you do?
Well, I think it's important. Number one, I think ultimately the system is will have to be addressed. I think we both recognize that the direction in which the city is currently going is not sustainable. So that's number one. I think you have to first recognize that you do have to change course. Okay. Secondly, I agree with you. You just can't deal with one issue. You have to deal with several. And the debt service will spike in 2018. And so I don't think the answer to solving this, putting the city on financial stability is to increase the debt. I think that we will be going in the wrong direction if we do that. The other thing is that I know Bill refers to it. I want to say a property tax, but it was put in place as a revenue cap in 2004. And let me just say, no other governmental entity in our region is operating under the same revenue cap. The county, for example. The county has resisted the same revenue cap that's imposed on the city being placed on it. And this revenue cap has been in place now for 11 years. And then the state of Texas. I sit on the Legislative Budget Board that sets the spending limits for the state of Texas. And I think most of us will agree that the leadership at the state level is very, very conservative. But yet the spending limit that's imposed on the state is not nearly as stringent as what's imposed on the city. I think when you have more people moving in our area, when we have a shortage of police officers, when we really need to beef up our own homeland security in the wake of what's happening now in the city and across the globe, I think it's important to have comprehensive finance reform and at the same time address the issue of your pension unfunded obligations, but do it in a way that I think is fiscally responsible to the whole system.
So the three areas that Sylvester talks about, the debt spike in 2018, that's about a $50 million a year problem. The property tax cap is about a $50 million issue, and that just means you're going to pay more property taxes. I would rather cut expenses rather than raise property taxes. But look, the elephant in the room is the pension issue. That's the one that we're currently spending $400 million a year on. Now, I agree it's a long-term problem in terms of it's beyond a 2-year horizon. But if we don't get on top of that, nothing else is going to matter. You can't fix anything else in the city that gets us out of bankruptcy court if you don't do something about the pension system.
Now, that said, we have an email from Tony who says many city employees are worried about their pensions. If elected, will either of you change the benefits that workers have already earned?
Yeah, I've said consistently I'm not in favor of that. I'm not sure it's even legal to do that, but even if it is legal, it's not the right thing to do. We made a deal with them, and we need to honor the deal that we made with the existing employees.
Well, I think it depends on the course that you take in trying to solve it. Even if you, as Bill indicated, that you're only going to deal with new hires. The reality is, I think, that the savings derived from just changing the system from the new hires may jeopardize even your current employees. That's number one. And I think and the debt service, let me just say, the debt service that the city of Houston is currently paying is considerably more than $50 million a year. It's considerably more than that. You're paying $150 million just on the infrastructure.
Well, actually, I was just talking about what that spike is.
Okay, with the spike. Okay. And so we're paying substantially more. What I would like to see, right now, police, for example, their pension and retirement system is different. It's the DROP program that came into place in the 90s is different than what it is today. The pension system for your municipal employees is multi-tiered. And so employees are paying more. The eligibility requirements are higher. And it's more difficult, So those changes have occurred. The only one where there has not been any changes has been related to the fire department.
And again, that's under state control. So what would you do as mayor that would be different from what Mayor Parker did, or that you think might be different from what your opponent would be able to do to convince the state to give you control?
This is a little bit of a misconception about saying that the firefighter is under control of the state and the other two are not. That's really not accurate. All three are written into state law. The other two plans have what's called meet and confer, which says that the employee representatives in the city can get together, and if they agree to something different than what's in the state statute, then they can implement that as opposed to what's in the state statute. But frankly, that's ended up creating more problems for those two plans. I mean, this idea that somehow just by letting the city and the employees negotiate solving the problem doesn't solve it at all, because both of those plans are significantly more underfunded than the firefighter plan is. And what happens is the administration goes to the employee groups and they say, look, we'd really like to give you a 3% raise, but we don't have the money to do it if we're going to make your pension payment. So why don't you let us defer your pension payment, and then we'll give you that 3% raise, or we'll buy you some more cars or trucks or whatever the budget pressure is. And it's the administration that actually ends up strong-arming the employee groups not to fully fund their pension. It's a terrible system.
But what would motivate the firefighters to want to even renegotiate?
I think the plan to financial success and even dealing with your pension obligation situation is to bring all of the stakeholders to the table. And what I mean by that, if we're talking about comprehensive finance reform, where you're putting the issue of the debt service on the table, the revenue cap on the table, the TERS on the table, the unfunded pension obligations on the table, and then police officers and firefighters and others will come to the table. If you're simply trying to balance the city's books on the backs of police and fire, for example, they're going to fight you with everything they have. But if you are saying to them as the CEO and the manager of this city, this is our financial situation, and I'm asking everyone, we have to deal with the debt service, we have to address the revenue cap, we have to bring the TERS, take $130 million out of this general fund every single year. That needs to be on the table. Pension obligations bonds on the table. And if you're asking everyone to sacrifice on behalf of the city of Houston for short and long-term viability, police and firefighters will come to the table. I think the problem has been, and I think the concern with the discourse that's taken place, if you're only talking about changing the system for police and firefighters and nobody else, you're not asking anybody else to come to the table, then they're going to resist you with everything that they have.
Bill King, anything you quibble with there?
Well, no, I think that it does have to be negotiation, but here's my problem. First of all, let's talk for a second about what the firefighters' benefit is, because they just issued a new report. Over a 30-year career, a firefighter will put in about $150,000 to $200,000. A report just issued by their plan 2 weeks ago said that the average benefit, first of all, the average retirement age was 54. The average benefit was a lump sum distribution of $813,000 plus a $58,000 a year retirement benefit for the rest of their life and their spouse's life, plus a 3% guaranteed increase to that $58,000 every year. And with a life expectancy of 84, you'll collect about $3.5 million in benefits for your $150,000 contribution. That's not reasonable. It's not sustainable. We don't need that to attract new firefighters. And look, I want to sit down and talk to them, but this is about 3,800 guys, 80% of which live outside the city of Houston, and they don't get to dictate to 2 million people what kind of benefit we're going to provide, especially when you're only talking about new firefighters.
But the reality is, and I think sometimes we we look at police and fire as if on one day we want them to protect us. On one day we want them to put out the fires when they're running to them and we're running away from them. And we treat them as though on the next day that they are our enemies. The reality is these are men and women, police officers in this city, firefighters in this city, municipal workers who are picking up our trash every single day in this city. And I think there's a way to deal with them. I think we have to deal with them in a very respectful manner. I think they have to be a part of the stakeholders that are sitting at the table. What will not work in the best interest of this city, if it's an us versus them sort of attitude, nothing will take place. And the legislature is not going to step in if we do not bring to the legislature a consensus plan. So this is a time when I think we identify what the problem is. I think we lay all the cards on the table. I think it's important to be transparent and then work to build a cohesive solution that works in the best interest of the people and the taxpayers of the city of Houston.
I want to jump in one point here. This idea about these different occupations are getting different pensions because one is more dangerous than the other. Forbes just issued a list of the most dangerous occupations in the country. Garbage workers is number 6 on that list. Firefighters is not on the list at all. And the reason it's not on is because 85% of the calls these days are ambulance calls, not fire calls. And yet their pension is 4 times greater than what garbage workers are. That's because firefighters have more political clout than garbage workers. That's what this whole system is around politics, not about the financial realities of the situation.
Well, but these are people, whether you are a firefighter, whether you're a police officer, whether you're the garbage worker, whether you're the person working in the health department, these are still individuals that are working for the city of Houston to help to make this city the great city that it is. And I think we have to recognize that. I think we just need to be very careful because I went to several funerals not too long ago when 4 firefighters lost their lives. And we were all there in this city, and we collectively mourned. These are the same individuals that are sacrificing their lives every day when their families don't know that they're going to whether or not they're going to return at the end of the day. I think as a city, we owe them the respect. All of the employees of the city of Houston, from ASME to the police to the fire, we owe all of them the respect of dealing with them in a very respectful fashion and asking everyone in this city to come to the table and sacrifice in the best interest of the city of Houston.
Well, that's obviously true. But we've also had municipal workers that we've gone to funerals for that have been killed alongside the road or picking up garbage, and yet their pension is a quarter of what a firefighter's is. And by the way, we've put up almost all the money we need to fund the firefighters' pension, but we've only put up half the money to fund the garbage workers. And so what's the justification for this incredible difference in the way we treat these two employees groups?
Bill, I don't disagree. I think all employees should be respected, every single one of them. But the question is, what is the solution? How do you reach a solution? And I think we have to be very pragmatic on the approach. And I think the best way to reach a solution is to broaden the context of the conversation. I think when we are only focusing in on the pension issue, as if the pension issue is what's causing all of the financial problems, challenges for the city, I think we missed the boat.
All right, fair enough. Then let's broaden the conversation. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen, and we're talking with Houston mayoral candidates Sylvester Turner and Bill King in advance of Saturday's runoff election. While balancing the budget is a critical responsibility for any mayor, each of you have priorities and programs that you want to pursue as mayor, which are of major importance to Houstonians. Road repairs, of course, being top of mind. That is the subject of a question from News 88.7's Saida Hassan.
You both identify infrastructure improvements as an important policy issue, but disagree on the future of Rebuild Houston. What is the best way to go about funding these projects and why?
Bill King, start us off.
So the idea of a dedicated fund, which was the essence of Rebuild, is a great idea. And the problem is the last 3 administrations we've had have basically taken money that we historically spent on infrastructure and moved that over to the general fund as pressures mounted on the general fund from various things, largely from pensions, but also other issues as well. And so it's real easy to not do infrastructure and move some of that money over to balance the budget. And that's what's been going on for the last 3 administrations. If you go back as late as 2005, we were reconstructing 375 lane miles a year of streets in this city, which is about what you need to replace the streets every 40 years. Last year, we did 105 miles. That's why the streets are in such terrible shape. So we've had this historic, 2 decades now of moving money from infrastructure funding over to general fund funding. And the idea that the backers of Rebuild Houston had was that they were going to set up and try to create a lockbox for some revenues that could not be used to fund the general fund. Now, Rebuild Houston went wrong in several ways. First of all, the pay-as-you-go doesn't work. We can talk about that if you want. But the biggest problem was it turned out not to be a lockbox at all. And it was written so vaguely that the administration has been able to move a bunch of that money and effectively use it to balance the general fund. We got 550 employees paying out of there right now. So that, to me, is the biggest failure of the program.
And what I would say to you, Craig, is that pay-as-you-go, I think, always works well. That doesn't stop you from leveraging your dollars to increase the amount that you need to build more projects. But I support the pay-as-you-go concept. And quite frankly, I think most Houstonians would support a concept as pay-as-you-go, especially when you have a debt service that's going to spike in 2018. And secondly, I agree with Bill. It was intended in 2010 to be a dedicated revenue stream for dedicated purposes, streets and drainage. And it should be, and should always be, a dedicated revenue source for dedicated purposes, streets and drainage. And that would be my commitment that I would make to the people in the city of Houston.
You mentioned the debt obligation, and that, of course, adds economic pressure. There are other economic pressures that come to bear over the course of time. And here's Andrew Schneider with one question relating directly to that.
If the city was not able to effectively deal with infrastructure repairs when the economy was strong and revenues were high, how do you propose to pay for those repairs when the economy is weak?
All right, so we're talking now about just a good old-fashioned slowing economy. In that context, can you as the next mayor really make any significant changes, upgrades to the current process of infrastructure repairs?
And my answer would be yes. If we maintain the revenue source, if we maintain it and we dedicate it and utilize it for that particular purpose, the answer is yes. But I would go one step further. Because the county, and we've talked about this during the course of this campaign, the county has like a 24-hour road maintenance repair system. And I think that's an excellent concept. And I think they have done an excellent job in taking care of their roads. And quite frankly, if you live in the city, you also live in the county. So there's nothing wrong with piggybacking what the county is doing and putting a similar program in effect, or even working with the county collaboratively to get it done. So I think we can achieve it, but I do think we need to maintain the revenue source and stay with the concept of pay-as-you-go.
Yeah, so the problem is this report that the Parker administration prepared the other day said that if you stay with the pay-as-you-go, you got $686 million over the next 4 years to do infrastructure, and it's not even vaguely enough money. And so we do have to leverage that revenue source. And by the way, the drainage fee is only about 30 or 40% of the revenues that go into the dedicated street and drainage fund. And as we get over that spike in 2018 and start paying down the bond debt, we actually start getting quite a bit more money recaptured, and it's plenty to do additional bonds. Look, for 180 years, what we did here was we roll the bonds. You would pay off bonds and you would roll that back in. And the reason you do that is because construction costs almost always go up faster than the interest that we pay on bonds, and that's why everybody in the country issues bonds. I mean, every municipality in this country issues bonds. Nobody relies on pay-as-you-go, and that's why we need to. That's why we need to go back to that system that worked very well before.
Well, let me differ with that. I am vice chair of the House Appropriations Committee, and by the way, in a Republican-controlled House, selected by a Republican speaker. Okay, TxDOT. We work very closely with the Texas Department of Transportation. The Texas Department of Transportation has abandoned this bonding scenario in terms of financing the construction of roads in the state of Texas. You know why? Because the debt service is extremely high, and we were pretty much out of GO bonds. We have now gone, in the state of Texas, under Republican leadership, we have gone to a pay-as-you-go model. And that is why on November the 3rd, just recently, the people voted to take $2.5 billion from the sales tax, a pretty much source, in order to put on the construction of streets, roads in the state of Texas. Over the last 4 years, we've added close to $5 billion annually to the Texas Department of Transportation in order to pay as you go. So the state is doing what the city chose to do in 2010.
Well, that's just not accurate. The state was on a pay-as-you-go system. We then started bonding. In fact, Sylvester's voted 17 times in the legislature for the state to issue bonds. And all we did in this last session was we took some of the sales tax and moved it over to start paying for roads. That'd be great if we had some sales tax to do with it. We don't have that option. I mean, here's the plain and simple truth. In the next 4 years, we're either going to do $680 million of projects total, or we're going to issue some new bonds. Those are the only two choices you've got. And I promise you, regardless of which one of us gets elected, there will be a bond issue to do some road work in this town.
And let me just say, because I can't let Bill get away with this, Bill is totally wrong on this issue. I'm at the table. I'm sitting there as the Vice Chair of Appropriations in the state of Texas. We have shifted from utilizing bonds because the debt service is extremely high. What Bill is offering is the way we used to do it. The reason why the infrastructure, Craig, is lagging behind is because Bill's proposal is the way the city of Houston used to do it. And the infrastructure has not been able to keep up with the growth and the development in the city of Houston. The reason why we shifted in 2010 from that old system is because you cannot sustain the economic development of this city unless you are able to have the infrastructure keep up with the development. That's why we've made the shift.
The problem was that we stopped doing street and road bonds in the city of Houston about 18 years ago. We haven't done a street and road bond in about 12 or 14 years now. And the reason we haven't done that is because as the pension payments were going up, the last three administrations started moving that money over to support the general fund instead of doing infrastructure. 17 times while he's been in the legislature, they've issued bonds up there. It's only been in the last session that they took this excess sales tax money they had and allocated that to street and roads. That's great if you've got it. We don't have it. We've got one choice. We've got two choices. Do $680 million of projects. That's exactly what Mayor Parker's administration says the Rebuild Houston program will generate over the next 4 years. $680 million or issue bonds. It's the only choice you got.
And I have voted for bonds at the state level in the past. But what we discovered is that we were not able to keep up with the growth and development in the state of Texas doing it the old way.
All right. I'm going to stop you just because I think we have pretty well covered, and I think you both basically stated your point 2 or 3 times. So why don't we'll move on to some other stuff in just a moment. It's a special edition of Houston Matters with mayoral candidates Bill King and Sylvester Turner. They are with us all hour long. We welcome your questions at talk@HoustonMatters.org. And stay with us as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're talking with Houston mayoral candidates Sylvester Turner and Bill King in advance of Saturday's runoff election. News 88.7's health and science reporter Carrie Feibel has a question for the two of you about public health and safety.
We live in a country where mass shootings have become an almost daily occurrence. As mayor of the 4th largest city, what specific things would you do to keep people safe, such as advocate for changes to gun laws, mental health policies, or other public safety reforms?
Sylvester Turner?
Well, the plan that I've put forth, and people can look at it online, Partners in Safety, calls for adding 540 additional police when you factor in attrition to over 5 years. I think that's important. We have roughly 5,300 police officers in the city right now, fewer than we had 10 years ago, and about 1,900 of them are eligible to retire right now. We need to return to community neighborhood policing, and I think that's especially important considering the times in which we live. So that's one. The other thing is that in view of what's taking place now, I think we need to expand Homeland Security. I think we need to be working with all of our various partners on the federal and state level, especially even as it relates to the Texas Department of Public Safety. We have beefed up Homeland Security and the terrorism operation within DPS. And I think the city of Houston needs to be working very closely with that. And then we need to be partnering with all of the key components in this city, whether it's the medical center, whether it's the port, whether it's NASA, you name it, to make sure that we are as safe as we can humanly possibly be.
Bill King?
Well, so I think the question was about mass shootings, and the vast majority of these are a mental health issue, and we've done a terrible job on mental health in this country, and we've done a terrible job of keeping guns out of the hands of people that have mental illness. And so we've got to do a better job of that. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have a lot of control over those things. They're mostly legislative, state legislative, and federal legislative issues that need to be addressed. I do think that what the Houston Police Department has done with their mental health unit, where they've trained officers to deal with mental health situations, de-escalate those, is important, and we need to expand that program based on the number of calls that they have. On the terrorism side, none of us really know, since we're all on the outside right now, exactly what the city of Houston is doing or is not doing about that. But I think regardless which of us get elected, that's something both of us will have to dig into right away and make sure, because obviously we're a huge target in this area.
Bill, we have a question for you from News 88.7's Florian Martin related to your position on a non-discrimination ordinance.
Mr. King, you are the favored candidate among opponents of the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance because you said you didn't like the ordinance as written. But you now say you want to sit down with HERO stakeholders to discuss what to do next because you're worried about the city's image after the repeal of HERO. What distinguishes you from Sylvester Turner when it comes to the possibility of bringing back a non-discrimination ordinance?
Well, I think I said that we need to get with stakeholders from the very beginning. I issued a long statement about this when the Supreme Court first issued it, and I haven't changed my opinion about it since then. Not that I'm against changing my opinion from time to time, but I haven't on this particular issue. I've always thought that we needed to – I thought that the mayor created an unnecessarily divisive environment on this issue. There was not a lot of collaboration with the various groups. And some of the things they did afterward, like that boneheaded move of subpoenaing the sermons, just throwing gasoline on the fire. That's not what the mayor's job is. The mayor's job is to calm things down and bring people together. So I would reach out to the faith community, which were the ones that primarily objected to this ordinance, and to the LGBT community, and have some conversations about, first of all, what is the problem that we're talking about? What problem are we trying to solve here? And is there a way to address that problem? And by the way, I had a law professor once that said that, the solution to passing a law is not the solution to every problem. There may be other ways to address this, like gender-neutral restrooms and that kind of thing.
Sylvester Turner, last month you said this is a democratic process. The people voted on November 3rd, and you think it's important now to deal with a whole host of issues that are important to every Houstonian. But you say on your website you're 100% committed to making sure everyone in Houston can live and work here without fear of discrimination, and that after the defeat of HERO, we need to evaluate what happened and then bring people together to find the best way forward.
Absolutely.
Those two statements are not mutually exclusive, of course, but they do kind of send a somewhat different signal. And I guess this is really a question for each of you, but do you believe a citywide non-discrimination ordinance is necessary, and do you believe it's a high priority?
Well, what I've said repeatedly, number one, I supported it in the first round, and I said that I respect the democratic process, and we all should respect the democratic process. But I've also said very emphatically that the way I interpret the vote against Proposition 1 was not a vote for discrimination. I don't think Houstonians are saying, or were saying that when they voted against Proposition 1, that they were voting for discrimination. And when we live in the most diverse city in the country, I think it's important for us to continue to fight against discrimination wherever you may find it.
Does that mean then that we need an ordinance to do that?
What that means is that you continue to fight against discrimination. And you to fight against discrimination, as I've done for 26 years, and will continue to do it if given the opportunity to be mayor, especially when it comes to discriminating against any person based on group affiliation, as it relates to employment, as it relates to contracting, as it relates to housing.
Does that mean an ordinance?
Well, what it means is that we will champion the battle against discrimination, and I am committed to that, as I have been committed over the last 26 years.
All right, Bill King, does it mean an ordinance?
I don't think we need an ordinance, and I don't think it's a priority. Listen, and during the time that we had this ordinance in place, there were 11 complaints filed. While we're having this discussion here today, there'll be 11 robbers and burglars in the city, and if we're lucky, our police department will solve one of those. In the next week, there'll be twice that many rapes, and if we're lucky, the police department will solve 4 or 5. So no, I don't consider this a priority.
Well, I do think, though, what I will say is that we have to deal with the fundamentals. We certainly have to deal with making sure that we have a sound infrastructure, that we have a well-financed city, and that we have a city that's safe. At the same time, I think we have to recognize that in our community, in this city, we are the most diverse. And I think it's always important to make sure that the city is at the forefront and that the message that we send throughout the country, even beyond the city of Houston, is that we do not condone discrimination based on group affiliation. I think that's always important.
But look, I don't know how anybody could think that about Houston. I mean, we have a retiring mayor who's been an openly gay person her entire political career. We've elected her 9 times in a row in a citywide race. We've had 4 or 5 other openly gay people serve on city council. We were the first city without an African-American majority to elect an African-American mayor in the United States. We elected a Latino to citywide office in 1971 when the Latino voting population was less than 10%. Anybody who thinks that Houston believes in discrimination or there's any kind of intolerance here doesn't know anything about this city.
Well, but let me just quickly say this. I heard what Donald Trump said the other day, okay? We do have an African-American that's president of the United States. Are we saying that discrimination does not exist within the United States? Certainly, I don't think Bill is saying that. Even though you may elect one person or 2 people, doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to be aggressive in fighting discrimination wherever you find it on whatever level. That is not a battle that has been won. That is a battle that you get up every day and you continue to fight against.
Well, certainly I agree with that, but there are federal remedies for everything except the LGBT component of that ordinance. And again, I'll get back to, in 9 months, there were 11 complaints, 5 of which were dismissed for lack of evidence. So how does this rise up to the most important problem in the city when we're facing these gigantic problems like 600 unsolved rape cases last year?
This is a special edition of Houston Matters. We're spending the hour with mayoral candidates Sylvester Turner and Bill King. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're spending the hour with Houston mayoral runoff candidates Bill King and Sylvester Turner in advance of Saturday's election. And we also continue with questions from News 88.7 reporters. Gentlemen, our next question comes from education reporter Laura Eisensee.
The mayor of Houston doesn't have direct control over local school districts, and some would say little influence. With that limitation, how exactly would you improve education in Houston, whether that's at the neighborhood school level or through higher education and workforce training?
Bill King?
So I would say they don't have direct or indirect control over education. We do have independent school boards. I think that the cities does have a role, however, in 2 very important ways. One is the mayor's office is the biggest bully pulpit in the region. And so I think talking about education as the mayor is important. Advocating things like early childhood, which I've done in the past, would certainly be part of the mission. I think probably the more meaningful part of it, though, is making sure that the city's supporting the school districts in the work that they're doing. And I'll give you an example. Sylvester and I were out at a forum earlier this year at a brand new school that HOUDecide built over in the northeast side. It was that one that's the first one Sinfronia organized. And I was driving around the neighborhood waiting for the forum to start, and I went past this brand new school, and immediately adjacent to it was an abandoned house with garbage stacked up in front of it. And the kids in that neighborhood were having to walk past, and by the way, there was no sidewalk there, walk past this house on the street to get to their school. And that's absurd. The city ought to be out there. If the school district is building a new school, we ought to be cleaning up that neighborhood, building sidewalks, and supporting them, and making sure they get their permits issued promptly, which is not the case. I will say that, I think this vision I've got of the proper relationship between the schools and the city is right, because we've been endorsed by about 20 former superintendent school board members from HISD and surrounding school districts.
Sylvester Turner.
Well, what I would quickly say to you is that you can't have a growing dynamic city moving in one direction and your school system moving in another. They 2 must go hand in hand. Every legislative session, for example, our school districts, and there are about 17 school districts that crisscross Houston or in Austin, fighting for additional resources on many different levels that will impact their schools. It doesn't make any sense for the city of Houston not to be a partner in working with the school districts when they are in Austin and getting their legislative initiatives through. Quite frankly, they need to be talking even before they get to Austin, and certainly I will be working very closely with them. Secondly, when it comes to after-school programs, the school and the city of Houston can be working much more effectively in after-school programs. There are certain schools, for example, where the sidewalks don't exist. The city can certainly take some responsibility there, and removing a lot of the weeds, the abandoned buildings, and all of that. That's blocking the way. The 2 must work hand in hand. You can't look at revitalizing the city, revitalizing a neighborhood, if the school district, for example, is looking at closing or consolidating that school, the two would then be working counter to their stated objectives. So they need to be partnering with one another. I think there are a number of things where the city can be working with the schools, but a collaborative approach, I think, will reap some significant benefits for everyone.
We have a question for you both about municipal IDs, and it comes from News 88.7 reporter Al Ortiz.
Several groups that advocate for some type of relief for Houston's undocumented immigrant community have said they will ask the new mayor to create municipal IDs for these persons. They say municipal IDs would make their lives a lot easier as they wait for the outcome of the litigation over President Obama's deferred action programs. Would you create municipal IDs for undocumented immigrants in Houston?
That's not a simple yes or no, but it's a yes or no. Sylvester
Well,
Turner?
I've repeatedly said in this campaign that I support it. Quite frankly, a diverse city, and I think we need to make sure that we have the tools available for people to take care of their families and to be able to navigate our system. And I think administratively we can take a look at it and see what's the best way to put something in that's unique to Houston. And then one of the other things that I had noted in the past that I think is important, when you're in a diverse city, I think it's important to know who's in your city. And I think this is one avenue of identifying and knowing who's in your city.
Bill King?
Yeah, so I think this is just a terrible idea on a whole lot of different levels. First of all, I can't imagine what the benefit of it is to start out with. Who's going to take a City of Houston municipal ID card? And what are we going to do to vet those people? If they don't have an ID already, how are we going to know that the person standing in front of this official at the City of Houston going to issue it is actually Bill King? You know, somebody suggested, well, if you have a utility bill, well, great, you know, I steal Sylvester's utility bill out of his garbage and I show up with it, and now I have an ID card for Sylvester Turner. I mean, this is ripe for identity fraud. Nobody's ever had even a vague idea of how much it would cost. And this is one of the problems I have is that, you know, we always are talking about adding these programs. This is how we got into the financial mess we is. How much would this program cost? If you want to propose this program, tell me how much it's going to cost. And I've never heard anybody even vaguely suggest what the cost would be. And by the way, just from the immigrant community standpoint, I really think having a database at City Hall that, you know, gives the location of every single person that's here illegally, subject to open records request, is probably not a great idea for them either.
This is a special edition of Houston Matters. We continue our conversation with mayoral runoff candidates Bill King and Sylvester Turner in advance of Saturday's election. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen talking with mayoral runoff candidates Sylvester Turner and Bill King. In October, the Houston City Council approved an arts and cultural plan for the city, a framework to support the creative community here. News 88.7 arts and culture reporter Amy Bishop has this question.
Even with recent reports showing the large economic impact of Houston's creative community, there's a notion among some that investing in the arts is not seen as a necessity. What are your thoughts on the importance of a strong local arts and culture scene, and what will be the fate of the city's new arts and cultural plan if you become the next mayor?
Bill King, kick us off.
Well, we fairly robust fund arts. We do it through the hotel-motel tax. And that's a dedicated source of money that can't be spent for anything else, and we need to make sure that that's the way the money is actually spent. One of the problems I had was that the mayor recently put a cap in on that, and she said if there's any collections over a certain amount, I don't remember exactly right now what the amount was right now, but anything over that got moved over into her special events fund. I'm not even sure that's legal, but I just thought it was a terrible idea, so I'm in favor of getting rid of that, and I think Sylvester agrees with me about that.
Yes, and I agree. I'm certainly in favor of removing the cap. I think when you look at the public investment that the city of Houston is making in the arts compared to other major cities, we're at the very low end. And I do think we need to find ways, innovative ways, of investing more in the arts. We're not just talking about some painting on the wall. These are economic engines, provide a lot of jobs. One of the things that I was able to do in this last legislative session was to get state support for the arts. We were able to get an additional $5 million for our local arts districts, was able to provide additional funding for two other major organizations in the city of Houston. And so I think we need to work not only looking at what the city can do, but what the state can do, establishing some meaningful partnerships with others. But I think it's very important for us to invest more in the arts, to take us from number 3 to look at being number 1 in the country.
Is there any subject in the 70-plus forums, debates, other joint appearances two of you have made over the last several months that you wish had been raised or that you wish had been given higher priority than it has? Anything that I'm sure you feel like you're talked out, but is there something that you think, man, I wish the city were a little more focused on this and a little less on everything else?
I'm going to tell you what, in 70 debates, you vet everything. I was at a forum the other night, and this lady got up and she was talking about the LED lights, and they're too bright. I don't know if you heard about this issue or not, but and I'd never heard about it before. But there's apparently
you weren't listening to Houston Matters.
Yeah, there's this whole controversy about these LED lights are too bright, and that we need to go from the bright blue down to the cool yellow or whatever. And I just looked at her and I said, you know what? You've stumped me. I've never heard about this before. But no, I just think, we've talked about certainly the big issues over and over and over in this debate.
And I would agree. I mean, after 70, 74, 75 forums from one part of the city to the other, I think if you name it, we have touched on it at least at one point in time. I think we've been thoroughly vetted, and now it's just up to the people to decide which Houston they want.
We've spent the hour talking about important issues to be sure. Personality is a part of what a mayor does. You represent the city. You become the most visible elected figure in the city. What do you think your personality would bring to the office?
I mean, it's hard to describe. I mean, I recognize that we face challenges. This is a growing, dynamic, vibrant city, and so I don't see problems. I see challenges. I see the glass as half full, not half empty. Will it be tough? Absolutely. But can we get it done? Yes, we will. And I think we'll get it done, recognizing that we're all Houstonians. We're diverse, but in the end, we're all Houston, and we ought to be moving in the same direction. So pragmatism and optimism.
Optimism. All right. Bill King, anything you think personality-wise you would bring to the office that is distinctive?
No, I think it's sort of interesting that Sylvester and I came from very different backgrounds, but very similar backgrounds. We both grew up in working-class families. We both worked our way through the University of Houston, by the way, in the Peach Bowl this coming New Year's Eve. And so I think that we both sort of have the same passion for the city. We got different approaches about things, but I don't think there's any question that both of us want the best thing for the city.
I want to say thank you again because of the 70-plus forums and debates and everything else. I know that that's not been the most fun in the world, but I think it's been valuable for voters. So I just wanted to say to both of you, thank you for taking all that time over the course of the ensuing months, however it shakes out.
Thanks for having us, Craig.
Thanks for having us.
And also want to mention the runoff election, of course, is Saturday. There are links at HoustonMatters.org to Harris County voter information, what you need to know before voting, and some previous Houston Matters conversations with these two gentlemen, Bill King and Sylvester Turner. Thank you again both very much for joining us today here on Houston Matters. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Adele Howland, Maggie Martin, and Paige Phelps. Tom Carter's our technical director. Houston Public Media's director of content is Capella Tucker. You can visit us anytime online. We're at HoustonMatters.org. You can listen back to past programs there. We also have some online exclusives there. You can find us on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We are where you are. On tomorrow's show, we'll consider the potential impact of the climate talks in Paris on Houston's industry and environmental movements. Also, a new report celebrates the economic impact of more than 10,000 restaurants in Houston, but denigrates often poor working conditions in many of them. We'll learn more. We'll also talk with a local restaurant and lifestyle group advocating for the end of tipping. Plus, Maggie Galehouse, the books editor for the Houston Chronicle, shares some of her favorite books from 2015. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.